been poor. I've been poor. I've worked from the time I was 12. My parents were driven out of old Mexico when I was only 5. My people were revolutionary refugees. They had to be fed by the United States government and housed by the United States government. I know what poverty is. I've been up through it.
That was from Monday night's Rock Center with Brian Williams, Mitt Romney's father, explaining his experience with poverty while he was running for president in 1967. Romney's roots is the subject of the Rock Center report from NBC News correspondent Mike Taibbi, who interviewed some of the Romney clan still living in Mexico. Mike Taibbi joins me now. Mike, thanks very much for joining me tonight.
Lawrence, how are you?
Mike, did you get any cooperation from the Romney campaign on tracking down his relatives in Mexico?
Not from the campaign at all. In fact, once they knew the subject of our report that we were pursuing, they said specifically they were not interested in having any response whatsoever. And it kind of makes sense when you think about it. I was listening before to Tony Perkins talk about the things Mitt Romney has not been willing to talk about. And one of those things obviously has been his history with the family history in Mexico and his ancestry there, because it would open the door, I think, to a discussion about a couple of issues which would be uncomfortable to dissect in detail. That would be immigration on the one hand, and a closer look at the Mormon religion, which Romney as a candidate, Romney as a sitting governor, never sought to discuss in any detail.
Well, it's right there in the family history. It's just like right around the corner from things that Romney sometimes comes close to. And there you saw his father with that very defensive stance about being a rich guy that's very similar to his son's defensive stance, but actually referring in that case to fleeing Mexico and experiencing a loss of wealth as a result of their fleeing Mexico. But tell the story, Mike, of why the Romney family found its way to Mexico in the first place.
Well, it was 1885, some 23 years after polygamy had been outlawed by the federal government, and after that ban had been reinforced and reconfirmed back in 1878. And Mitt Romney's great-grandfather, Miles Park Romney, decided in 1885, he already had 4 wives, that he was going to leave for Mexico because he was, at that point, facing prosecution for what the Mormons call plural marriage. And so he led an expedition, covered wagon expedition, down to northern Mexico and established the first of those colonies, and they were followed by many, many hundreds of others, including his 5th wife, Hannah Hood Hill. And it was Hannah Hood Hill and Miles Park Romney who planted the Romney family tree in Mexico, from which Mitt on the one side and the cousins we interviewed, who are Mike and Leighton and Meredith on the other side, they stayed down. And as you heard George Romney say in that clip from 1968, his family brought them up because the violence of the Mexican Revolution drove them out of Mexico. And interestingly, when you listen to that clip, what you're reminded of, what I was, is that in a sense, George Romney, Mitt Romney's father, a presidential candidate, a sitting governor, the head of the Chrysler Corporation, would have been a poster child for the DREAM Act, which Mitt Romney, candidate, now opposes vociferously. Could potentially be a problem for him, obviously, with the Latino voters. But it's interesting to hear George Romney describe very precisely what happened to him when he was brought back to the United States at the age of 5.
And Mike, when George Romney was running for president, did the question of his birth, of his legitimate right to run for president, come up? He was born on foreign soil, claiming American citizenship, which by all records indicates was a legitimate claim of American citizenship.
Yeah, our research showed that the question did come up, but before that happened, before it became an issue of national discussion, we all remember what happened. He made the famous statement about having been brainwashed into a hawkish position about Vietnam, and that brainwashing statement essentially derailed his candidacy, his pursuit of the nomination, which Richard Nixon, of course, won later that year. So there never was a full-throated discussion either about that issue, his citizenship, or about the Mormon religion. Don't forget, if Mitt Romney now wins the nomination, and many see him, obviously it's been reported for a couple of weeks now through Iowa and New Hampshire as the inevitable nominee, he will go further than any Mormon ever has in the presidential electoral process.
NBC's Mike Taibbi, thanks for joining me tonight, Mike.
All right, Lawrence.
Coming up, President Obama's re-election campaign and